For the second time in a week, a deadly attack on French forces in Mali. 2 more soldiers killed by a bomb. In total, 50 French troops have died since the country intervened in 2013 to fight jihadists. Iran marks 1 year since a top general was killed in a U.S. drone strike. Thousands grieving Qasem Soleimani's death and vowing revenge. Tehran blames Washington for raising tensions between the two countries. And the French government criticized for its vaccination rollout. Despite having the highest number of COVID cases in Western Europe, France has been slow to deliver jabs to frontline workers and the vulnerable. And we begin in Mali, where 2 French soldiers were killed in the northeast of the country when their vehicle hit an improvised explosive device. Both were members of a regiment specializing in intelligence work. It is the latest blow to France's military operations in the country. Days earlier, 3 soldiers lost their lives in an almost identical circumstance. Since France began its intervention in 2013 to drive out jihadists, at least 50 French soldiers have been killed. Andrew Hillier has more.
The 2 latest victims of France's bloody, drawn-out war against jihadists in Mali. They were killed in Menaka, a northeastern region of the country, when a blast blew up the vehicle they were travelling in. In a statement, the office of French President Emmanuel Macron said he had learnt of their deaths with great sadness, but vowed to keep up the fight against terrorism in Mali. The attack is yet another body blow to French military operations in the country. It comes barely a week after 3 soldiers were killed in the central region of Hombori in almost identical circumstances. That attack, along with the latest one, brings to 50 the number of French soldiers killed in Mali since France intervened in 2013. Back then, French soldiers were greeted with cheers as they fought to drive back jihadists that had overrun large parts of the country. A year later, Operation Barkhane was launched across the Sahel region with the aim of eradicating armed jihadist groups. Altogether, some 5,100 French troops are involved in the operation, fighting alongside soldiers from Mauritania, Chad, Burkina Faso and Niger, which together make up the G5 Sahel group.
Meanwhile, near the Malian border in neighboring Niger, at least 70 civilians were killed in simultaneous attacks on 2 villages by suspected extremists. The so-called tri-border area is rampant as militants flow back and forth over the porous borders of Mali and Burkina Faso. Last year alone, hundreds of people were killed in attacks, and Saturday's events came on the same day that results from Niger's presidential election put the ruling party candidate in a clear lead, with a runoff set for next month. Well, Iranians have been paying tribute at the grave of Qasem Soleimani to mark 1 year since a top general was killed in a U.S. drone strike. Now, this event happened at the Baghdad International Airport, his killing, and that unleashed outrage in his home country. The general was Iran's most prominent military leader and the architect of the country's influence in the Middle East.
1 year after his death, Qasem Soleimani's image is everywhere in Iran. At his burial place, Iranians have come to pay tribute to the country's most influential military commander. On the anniversary of his killing, thousands have come to grieve and vow revenge against the US.
نسل جدید اولا که با ادامه راه ایشون سیلی بزرگی تو دهن اسرائیل و آمریکا همه هواداران اونها خواهد زد.
On January 3rd, 2020, Qasem Soleimani was riding in a car when he was killed in a US drone strike at Baghdad International Airport. Soleimani was the architect of Iran's growing sway across the Middle East. His assassination provoked an immediate backlash. Iran responded by firing a volley of missiles at a US military base in Iraq. The risk of all-out conflict had never been greater, but although war never came to pass, 1 year on, Iran's top military brass is still warning the US against any attack.
هر عملی از دشمن رو با ضربه محکمتر و متقابلا مستحکمتر پاسخ خواهیم داد. این بارها و بارها اثبات شده. امروز هم همین بیان رو داریم.
Tensions have been once again rising in recent days, with Iranian leaders accusing the US of looking for a pretext for war. But earlier this week, US media reported that Washington had ordered the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz out of Gulf waters to avoid any risk of conflict breaking out during Trump's last days in office.
Well, here in France, authorities brought forward a coronavirus curfew from 8 p.m. to 6 p.m. The change affects the 15 worst affected departments in the country. And with more than 2.6 million infections, France has the highest COVID case count in Western Europe and the 5th highest in the world. Yena Lee reports.
Downtown Nancy deserted. The usually bustling Place Stanislas was empty as a new 6 p.m. curfew kicked off. Early in the day, though, locals were out and about. It was their last chance to walk around and do some shopping before hunkering down for the evening.
C'était essentiel parce que pour le coup, je comprends même pas qu'il n'y ait pas de confinement tout court, franchement.
Voilà, il y a de nouveaux des cas, de nouveaux des morts. Après, voilà, il faut aussi savoir prendre sur soi.
For most shopkeepers, closing time had never been so early.
Je suis lassée, je suis fatiguée psychologiquement parce qu'on ne sait jamais ce qui nous attend en fait. J'essaye de positiver, de me dire qu'on va s'en sortir, le vaccin est arrivé, on espère voir le bout du tunnel au courant de l'année.
The residents of Nancy aren't alone. In total, some 6 million inhabitants of 15 French departments have to stay at home after 6 p.m. Some business owners and representatives voiced their concerns about the new restrictions.
À mon avis, ça va être une contrainte supplémentaire pour les gens qui quittent le travail. Ils vont pas pouvoir aller faire les courses. Donc ils vont se retrouver tous le week-end à aller faire les courses en même temps. Ça va être une aberration pour moi.
25% du chiffre d'affaires journalier entre 17h et 19h. Donc c'est une catastrophe économique pour les commerçants.
The French government says it made this difficult decision due to the high infection rates in the 15 areas. As for the rest of the country, an 8 p.m. curfew remains in place.
And staying in France, an investigation has been opened after a massive rave was held violating COVID curfew and other restrictions. 7 people have been detained, including 2 alleged organizers. Thousands had attended the party in Western France, and police issued more than 1,200 fines ranging from breaking the curfew to not wearing a mask and illegal drug use. Meanwhile, the vaccination rollout here in France has been widely criticized. Since administering its first vaccine last week, France has made little headway. Only about 50 people per day have been taking jabs, compared to about 20,000 per day in neighboring Germany. Now the French government says it will speed things up. Emerald Maxwell has more.
Healthcare staff over the age of 50 weren't supposed to be called up till the end of January. But after criticism that France is vaccinating too slowly, the government has brought forward their turn to receive a first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID jab.
Je suis très content, vraiment très heureux de pouvoir bénéficier de la vaccination dès maintenant.
This 56-year-old medical professional didn't hesitate to volunteer for the shot.
La vaccination, on l'attendait depuis un moment. C'est le seul moyen, je pense, de sortir de cette situation qui est catastrophique, aussi bien sur le plan humain, avec encore une fois cette surmortalité, que sur le plan économique.
As head of a department, he wants to encourage his 450 staff to follow his lead.
Je pense qu'il est important qu'un des responsables, en tout cas, montre que la vaccination est importante et puis qu'elle permet à tout un chacun non seulement de protéger les patients, mais de protéger aussi ses proches.
It's the same story for this midwife, some of whose colleagues have shown reluctance to be vaccinated.
Certaines collègues à l'hôpital, effectivement, sont réfractaires au vaccin parce qu'elles n'ont pas assez d'informations, qu'elles ont peur du fait que c'est un vaccin tout récent pour lequel, finalement, on a très peu de savoir sur les effets secondaires à long terme.
There are 25,000 medical staff aged over 50 working in public hospitals in Paris alone. But the vaccine won't be compulsory, and the French capital's hospitals are relying on persuading staff with an information campaign. They're opening 10 vaccination centres next week. France has only vaccinated a few hundred people since it began its rollout last Sunday. It's the only European country where written consent is required to receive the shots.
Meanwhile, India is prepping the rollout of 2 vaccines. It has the second highest number of infections in the world. Officials hope to vaccinate some 300 million people within 6 to 8 months. Yenna Lee takes a look at the challenges.
Going through the motions for an upcoming vaccination drive. Clinic staff and would-be patients gather at health centres in India, but no one is receiving a COVID-19 vaccine just yet.
As per Government of India guidelines, we are doing the dry run today. Our arrangements are satisfactory. We have waiting room, our vaccination room and monitoring area. Our teams are in place.
Saturday, India put its vaccine delivery system to the test, checking if its health infrastructure is ready to deal with transportation, cold storage and mass inoculation. A chance for staff to test an online database and for drill participants to look towards the future.
I'm not afraid. To end this pandemic, we have to get vaccinated. For a year, I've been working in public health, and I'd like to get injected and also motivate others to do the same.
The nationwide rehearsal took place a day after India's drug regulator recommended emergency use of 2 coronavirus vaccines, one made by AstraZeneca and Oxford University, the other by India's Bharat Biotech. 2 more are on trial in the country. The world's second most populous nation also has the second highest number of COVID-19 infections. More than 10.3 million people have contracted the disease so far. The Indian government aims to inoculate 300 million people by August. The first phase is reserved for health workers, frontline civil servants and people over the age of 50 with underlying medical conditions.
Days after a landslide near Norway's capital, rescue workers have recovered a 4th body. However, the search continues for another 6 people that are still missing. The disaster has seized the attention of the country and its 5 million people over the new year.
They've pledged not to scale down the search yet. Days after the worst landslide in modern Norwegian history, rescue teams helped by sniffer dogs uncovered another body. They're still holding out hope of finding survivors trapped in air pockets among the destroyed buildings.
Dette jo fortsatt en redningsaksjon med håp om overlevende. Det har jo vært sagt tidligere og presisert fra flere her at det flere ting som må på plass for å overleve i et skred. Det må være en isolert luftlomme, det må være isolasjon for temperaturen, og etter hvert så må det også være tilgang på vann.
The landslide early Wednesday left a deep crater-like ravine after it cut through the village of Ask, 25 kilometers northeast of the capital, Oslo. At least 9 buildings with over 30 apartments were destroyed, buried under mud, others cut in 2, and some left teetering over the crater and subsequently falling over the edge. Over 1,000 people have been evacuated amid fears of further landslides.
Om vi får lov til å flytte tilbake igjen i boligene, det vet vi heller ikke. Så foreløpig alt usikkert og uvisst, og det kanskje det også som vanskelig i en sånn periode. Først og fremst så tenker vi på de etterlatte og de som har mistet alt.
The exact cause of the disaster isn't yet known, but authorities say it was a quick clay slide, a sort of clay that can collapse and turn to fluid when overstressed, such as by excessive rain.
Well, Mauricio Pochettino has vowed to win with style as he was appointed head coach of Paris Saint-Germain. He's been out of work since being sacked by Tottenham in 2019. Before that, he was the boss also at Southampton. Now, Pochettino succeeds Thomas Tuchel, who was sacked after 2.5 years on the job. And it's a chance for Pochettino to lead a club where he also played between 2001 and 2003.
I think it's so exciting to be here and start to build again this relationship. And I think always follow Paris Saint-Germain after to play here. Always very good relationship with the fans, with the supporter. And Paris is one of the biggest clubs on the world.
Well, Pochettino will be at today's training session. His first major test, though, will be Champions League's last 16 away leg. That's in Barcelona in next month. Well, that brings us to an end of this bulletin. Thanks for watching, and please stay tuned to France 24.